I'm Lister Sinclair, and this is Ideas. In 1993, Don Hill saw a ghost in the house his family had bought in Canmore, Alberta. It was a standard haunted house, the noises, the cold spots, the terror. They sold the house, and Don Hill spent the next 4 years trying to understand what had happened. In the summer of 1997, he volunteered as a subject in Michael Persinger's lab at Laurentian University, and it was there he saw again and felt the ghost that haunted his Rocky Mountain home. This is how our program, the first in a 3-part series, ended last week.
Fear. I've known this fear before. When I was living in my mountain home in Canmore.
Oh, that's interesting.
Brief flashes of white light, a muted soapstone color, smudges,
almost like
really mere shadows.
I'm rushing and shaking there a bit.
It's about here the dreadful feeling begins anew.
Ooh, a rush of cold. Whew. And also visual effects, like there was a pulse of a kind of a green light. My shoulders are very tense up to my ears right now.
Discomfort, and twitching, and lapses of focus.
This is close to the experience I had in the house. Right, what happened just right, yeah. Well, eyes, definitely seeing eyes there. Very fearful. Definite visual effects. Don't stop this. This is getting close to the apparition I saw.
Don Hill's experience in the lab was stimulated by a machine that creates electromagnetic fields, similar to those that occur naturally in some kinds of geographic terrain. That the machine works to create hallucinations is beyond doubt. The experimental proof is astonishing. And so are the implications. Tonight on Ideas, Part 2 of Haunted House, Haunted Mind by Don Hill.
I'm in the lab of Michael Persinger at Laurentian University in Sudbury, Ontario.
When you asked to be in this experiment, after you had explained it to me, I realized that you were on a quest. You were a scientist at large. And so consequently, after the appropriate precautions were taken, we agreed to allow you to go through the experiment.
Dr. Persinger and his assistant are putting a modified motorcycle helmet over my head. It contains a piece of electronic gear that stimulates the brain's temporal lobes with subtle, pulsed patterns of electromagnetic fields, EMF. The octopus, as it's called, because of all the wire coming out of the back of it, can invoke an altered state of consciousness. Diary, second session, afternoon, August 29th, 1997.
There's something definitely from the left. You know what? It is a circular object from the left, right above my left.
Okay. Continue to describe, okay?
It's disappeared.
Okay.
Oh, no, it's back again.
See you in 20.
Yeah.
During this session, I traveled through a series of emotions, felt strange physical effects, puzzling shifts in mood. I could feel the space, hallucinations, a very odd landscape.
Okay, there's shadows of kind of eyes again. But they're just okay. There's a feeling of pressure, like somebody slightly pushing on my eyes. That was just there from a very. Hands are clammy.
Don?
Yeah.
The sequence is over. We'll be coming in. Just relax.
Diary. Later, Persinger told me his assistant came into the sound isolation chamber. She said I was white as a ghost. Persinger said he terminated the first session of the experiment after I went into a mild panic, even though I wanted to go on. It wouldn't have been ethical to continue, he said. Overall, I felt as if time had passed more quickly during this session. It was also kind of fun in spots, a departure from the first session, which replicated the terror I felt in the Rockies.
You're in the chamber. We stimulated your brain with complex magnetic fields that contained very significant neural information. And you experienced a ghost, fear, and all types of other profound experiences. But you see, we were the ghost. We generated it. We created it by applying that technology through your brain.
The intensity of electromagnetic fields generated by Persinger's device is little more than that of a hairdryer. It's the kind of field that counts, not the intensity. The brain is slowly and continuously aroused to a perturbation point, kind of like great sex. The subtle pulsations magnify feelings, provide an emotional tag, and amplify the brain's own experiences.
Okay, if there is light coming out from underneath the visual field, yeah, right there on the right. Again, the mirror, there's right. My eyes are wide open. I'm seeing other eyes again, a pair of eyes looking at me and approaching me and getting closer. Yeah, taking on very definite form.
The types of experiences that we generate are a function of which side of the brain to which the stimuli are applied. And that's totally predictable because there are subtle structural differences between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere of the human brain. And if we're affecting these subtle structural changes and these subtle structural activities, we would expect to find differences. Because the left hemisphere is tied to language and the sense of self, we stimulate that, we can get the kind of first-person experience and meaningfulness. But if we stimulate the right side of the brain, we can get the right hemispheric equivalent of the sense of self, which is the sensed presence, the sensation that another entity is beside you. That other entity, of course, is your right hemispheric equivalent of your sense of self.
So that explains my ghost in the Rockies. Or does it? Charles Tart is a psychologist and professor emeritus at the University of California at Davis. He's been following the work of Michael Persinger and his lab.
Well, you went into that laboratory with an expectation, a very strong expectation that this would cast light on the experience you'd had in that house. Now, I don't know how much the actual laboratory procedure affected your brain. It might have done it a little bit, it might have done it a lot, but you then went in with this strong psychological set to then shape things. So it's quite possible that what happened in the laboratory to you produced some genuine effects in your brain, but what those were is very hard to separate out from the construction you then made out of it because of your expectations.
I don't think it's a delusion, because after all, if you have a similar experience but you know that it was induced, under conditions where it makes sense neurologically, and we don't really have mechanisms yet underneath it, but a kind of proto-mechanisms, well, then it makes a lot of sense.
Dean Radin. He's the author of The Conscious Universe, The Scientific Truth of Psychic Phenomena. Dr. Radin has investigated the wild frontier of science for AT&T, Princeton's Department of Psychology, the University of Edinburgh, SRI International, and the U.S. government.
You don't have these feelings just randomly every third day, but only in certain locations and only in certain laboratory contexts. Well, that's the beginning of understanding. I mean, it makes sense.
There's a definite feeling in the pit of my stomach. There's something very, very bad happened to me, and I'm just sort of going, yeah. I know that feeling, too, only once before. It's just
About 15 minutes into the application, you were beginning to have electrical signatures which told us that the deep portions of your thalamus and amygdalo-hippocampal regions were beginning to send direct information into the cortex because we were picking it up on an electroencephalogram. Electroencephalographic activity primarily measures only the cerebral cortical activity, not the deep regions of the brain unless that information gets to the cortex.
Dr. Michael Persinger.
Every time you begin to have a rush or a chill, there was a very clear signature showing up over the temporal lobe and to some extent generalized to the other areas, which tells me there's a subcortical source.